who's going to be in charge, Enid Rosario Ramos from the School of Education of Michigan, also from the Universidad de Puerto Rico before that. So one of those, like many of us that sort of wet our feet in both institutions. So with that said, I leave you with Enid.
Let me see, I'm not a PC person. A ver. Obviously not a PC person, can't even find the cursor. Anyone? Oh, ahí está. Oh, all right. All right. I'll put on el timer. Okay. I'm gonna do the presentation in English mainly because it's been a while, so I'm used to talking about my work in English, so it's kind of hard to me to speak in Spanish about my work. It's not hard for me to talk to my family and friends and people about all kinds of inappropriate things in Spanish, but certainly my professional language has been English for a while. So I'm Enid Rosario Ramos. I'm a faculty at the School of Education and Educational Studies at the University of Michigan, but I'm an alumni of the University of Puerto Rico. I graduated from the psychology program a couple of years ago. I won't tell you how many. And the title of my talk today is Puerto Rican Vulnerability and Resistance, a case for inquiry-based education and civic engagement. And I'm really trying to sort of draw in the theme of vulnerability, which is the theme of the symposium, and start thinking about how do we use that theme as a way for engaging young people in thinking about disruptions in life across multiple geographies, multiple peoples, et cetera. And let me start with, after the January earthquake, I received an email from one of my colleagues at Michigan with a subject line that says, "How much more can Puerto Rico take?" And as someone who was born and raised in Puerto Rico and have family in Puerto Rico, it took me a moment to even open the email. And it was a very nice email. And even sort of with a question about what can we do to support people in Puerto Rico. But at that moment, I was really forced to reflect on everything that Puerto Rico has endured for the last 3 years. And as those of you who are from Puerto Rico, you know this story, but for those of you who are coming from Michigan, in September of 2017, Puerto Rico was hit by an almost Category 5 hurricane that devastated the archipelago. It knocked down power, communications, water systems, and it caused significant damage to buildings and structures. And the recovery was a bit challenging for people, and I think that it still sort of continues to this day. And in the midst of recovery, after about 2 years later, a series of text messages between the governor and some of his friends and members of his cabinet leaked to the public. These messages reveal sort of rampant sexism, misogyny, homophobia, corruption of the local government, and in turn triggered protests that are called now El Verano del 2019, or the summer of 2009, that led to the eventual resignation of then Governor Rosselló. And fast forward to the current times, Puerto Rico is experiencing unprecedented seismic activity, which has once again made visible the vulnerability of both physical but also political infrastructures in Puerto Rico, leading people to once again have to sort of organize to address their own needs while also demanding social change. And sort of a reflection of the events since 2017's Hurricane Maria, very well aligns with the theme of the symposium. Puerto Rico's vulnerability has been painfully visible in the last decade, and just as clear has been its people's agency, empowerment, and legacy of resistance. So I want to be able to talk about both of those things. So today I have 4 main goals that I hope you keep me accountable for. First, I'll make a case for inquiry-based social studies education, sort of a nod to Darren Stockdale. We've worked on a lot of things for some years. I've learned quite a bit from him. Second, I will argue that vulnerability can be a generative concept for understanding human life, but also for organizing teaching. I will use the important events in Puerto Rico since 2017 as a case for understanding vulnerability and resistance, with the ultimate goal that to argue for integrating civic engagement and political participation in the work of schools, that I feel that it's important for educators to engage young people in the legacy of activism that has already evolved in Puerto Rico, and it's very visible. So let's begin with a question: why problems? And I'm not defining problems here as negative occurrences, but as instances, events, or situations that really makes us think and act. Problems unsettle experience and create a need for learning. They generate motivation for finding solutions. And they have the potential to promote change, both at the individual level, but also collectively. And I would argue again that problems also help drive and structure instruction. That engaging young people in problems and solution finding helps the teacher think about what are the steps that young people or my students need to take in order to create a solution to a problem that they've developed collectively and that they care about. And we see that current educational frameworks agree with this way of organizing instruction. The Department of Education in Puerto Rico, looking at their social studies curriculum framework, they argue that social studies curriculum discusses the importance of should encourage action and reflection towards the fundamental problems of the Puerto Rican society with the goal of improving citizens' quality of life. So this is part of what the Department of Education says the social studies should be doing in schools. We can certainly argue if that's what's happening, but and similarly, when we look at the College Career and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies State Standards, which is a framework used in the United States for organizing social studies instruction, you see a similar argument for social studies education to recognizes societal problems, that ask good questions and develop robust investigations into them, consider possible solutions and consequences, separate evidence from parochial opinions, and communicate and act what they learn, right? And for those of you who are here as scholars who are, studying particular historical events, or you're in history, sociology maybe, these are the kinds of things that you do in your professional practice, right? So the ask is to develop instructional practices that approximate the disciplines in some way. I see some nodding, right? So this is not new to you, right? The work that you do, you identify problems, you generate really good generative questions, you investigate those questions, and then you either communicate your solutions or act in some way, right? So this is really what is the ask is, how can we approximate instruction in classrooms to professional practice? Doesn't mean that it looks exactly the same, but approximate. And the C3 framework proposes what they call the inquiry arc, which is a process for the development and enactment of social studies inquiries. I lost my cursor again. Where is it? Sorry. Nope. So the first dimension is developing questions that are compelling, that are intriguing, and that are intellectually honest, right? And that can be explored to multiple disciplines, right? The dimension two is how do we apply disciplinary concepts, right? Ideas from history, from geography, from civics. How can we use processes, themes, ideas from those disciplines to respond to those questions? That we teach children or students and youth how to evaluate sources, through disciplinary lenses, and that we provide opportunities for them to either communicate their conclusions or act in some way that they decide. So with that in mind, our question today is vulnerability, right? And why vulnerability? Well, global events are making vulnerability increasingly visible, right? We see climate crises, political strife, economic crisis. Now we're seeing, something like the coronavirus, right? That has created this global panic, right? And that you see how sort of an event in a particular place now becomes spread around the globe, and sort of the ideas and feelings about it also spread. So the vulnerability has become very visible as global processes sort of as our interactions continue to become more global. So I believe that this is a generative question. I was excited to see the theme. I was like, oh, I could do that. I don't have to stretch too much, I think. It's applicable to many situations of disruption, and it sort of connects to different geopolitical realities across nation states, across communities, or across people. So given our theme for today, and what I'm hoping to do is to answer this question using the case of Puerto Rico since 2017, with the acknowledgement that the last 3 years, sort of the consequence, the vulnerabilities and resistance and all of the things that are involved in the last 3 years really date back. They have historical antecedents that go far beyond 3 years. Now, I would be very uncomfortable advocating for thinking about inquiries around vulnerability without discussing how people navigate vulnerability and resist vulnerability. So I suggest that an inquiry on vulnerability should include understanding the conditions that generate vulnerability for people. But I would also think about what leads to resistance, right? What leads to the development of political consciousness or critical consciousness about the situations and conditions that makes us vulnerable. And then what triggers resistance or navigation of that vulnerability? What is the secret sauce, right? What needs to be in place so that people take action to address the vulnerabilities that they've been placed in? So the rest of the talk is really trying to respond to that intellectual problem. How does where we live makes us vulnerable? And again, I really want to honor both, or sort of think about both the vulnerabilities in Puerto Rico, but also think about resistance as a way to honor the agency of Puerto Rican people, both in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora. Now, before delving into the inquiry, I wanted to briefly discuss two frameworks that always shape my thinking about Puerto Rico. A lot of my work has colonialism as a necessary framework for understanding the Puerto Rican experience, both in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora. For those of you who are from Puerto Rico, this is not new. For those of you coming from Michigan, maybe. And the idea is that the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States has shaped almost all social and political structures, right? It impacts the political parties, including their platforms, right? 3 of the major parties are defined in many ways by their preference for the political status. It has an impact on the economic structures in Puerto Rico. It has impacted the development of the educational system in Puerto Rico, so it sort of shapes a lot of the experience. And that relationship doesn't end in the archipelago. As people move in between Puerto Rico and the United States, that system continues to impact the lives of people who have left Puerto Rico as well. And in more simple terms, now it seems like almost every family in Puerto Rico has been disrupted in some way by movement, right? So now you have this relationship of families across geopolitical borders. And then I also draw on critical race theory as a way to recognize Puerto Rican people as a racialized people and to think about how perceptions and narratives about Puerto Rican race, ethnicity, cultural values, linguistic background, et cetera, shape the experiences of Puerto Ricans here, but also in the diaspora. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the research that I've done with the Puerto Rican diaspora. So going back to the C3 framework, trying to get a thread across, When learning about Puerto Rican recent history, we definitely need to draw on disciplinary knowledge that has to do with geography, right? The hurricanes come to Puerto Rico because of Puerto Rico's geographic location, right? The seismic activity also has to do with the geographic location of Puerto Rico. It also requires some understanding about economics. A lot of the sources of vulnerability that have been more recent have, in some ways, part of that explanation dates to the financial crisis in the last decade or over the last decade, but also goes back decades, right? So the economic system, how has it unfolded, had, in many ways, had some impact in how the recent events unfolded and sort of the impact of those events. Of course, thinking about the history of Puerto Rico, right? What has happened in the last 2-3 decades that led to the more current events, and knowledge about civics, both in terms of how political systems work in Puerto Rico, but also how people have access to participation in a democratic system, right? So as I've said before, right, September 20th of 2017, Hurricane Maria makes landfall. The damage is estimated at $90 billion, and official deaths at 2,975, although I'll sort of mention there's the disputes around the actual death toll. Hurricane Maria revealed a set of vulnerabilities in the country. Some of these were directly caused by the hurricane. Others were sort of the result of longer historical, political, economic processes. One, the hurricane was almost Category 5, so of course the devastation was historic. And yet for many, the biggest tragedy really was the inadequacy of relief efforts after the hurricane, both at the local level, but also at the federal level. We probably all remember the President of the United States throwing paper towels at people and sort of trying to discount the impact on life, and sort of justifying the lack of efficiency and care that the federal government deployed. So those are some sources of vulnerability, right? The local response, the federal response, the hurricane itself was also a part of that. And then you have, I think the accounting for the deaths caused by Maria is one of the prime examples of how all of these things coalesce to create a particularly vulnerable situation for Puerto Rican people, not even being able to know how many people were lost during the hurricane. Now, this experience in some ways is not new. In mainstream media, Hurricane Katrina was often, in the US, was often referred to as Trump's Katrina. And the idea was sort of the comparison between the lack of care shown by federal agencies towards the people of New Orleans, right? And in the United States, there's a whole, discussion around the racialized identities of that community, right? A community that was largely poor, largely African American, and sort of how the federal response was lacking because, in large part, because of the community that was impacted. And there have been similar sort of discussions around why the lack of care for Puerto Rico, and thinking about the disparities in the provision of aid for Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and what Texas received during Hurricane Harvey, or what Florida received during Hurricane Irma, right? And those disparities have been discussed, and sort of thinking about what is about the identities and the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States that impacted that response, that was perceived as sort of lacking, inefficient, inadequate, in some ways racist, discriminatory, okay? Now, the impact of Maria extended beyond the geopolitical borders of Puerto Rico. It caused a mass migration to the continental USA, and that migration caused disruptions in family structures and employment, housing, and certainly in children's education. So I was asked to talk a little bit about my own research. What I want to argue here is that set of vulnerabilities sort of traveled with people as well, in many ways. So before the hurricane, my colleague Awilda Rodriguez and I were in communication with the school district in Central Florida, unnamed. We're calling it Mockingbird Public Schools. mockingbird being the state bird of Florida. And then Hurricane Maria happened. In the midst of that conversation, both Awilda and I have family in Puerto Rico, so we kind of dropped everything and were disconnected for a little while. We reached back to the district on understanding that their needs had changed. They were receiving students after Maria. So we worked to partner with them to think about what were the educational transitions of family who made the decision to relocate after the hurricane, and how was the district's response to that move, to the influx of students, right? So just to get a little bit of background, relocation estimates at around 135,000 people who left Puerto Rico in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane. About over 11,000 students from Puerto Rico enrolled in Florida schools around that time. Now, in Mockingbird Public Schools, they received 3,500 students from Puerto Rico between the months of September and December. So within about 6 weeks, the district received 3,500 students. Now, neighboring districts received also large numbers. So it was not just this one district that was addressing the influx, but they certainly had quite a significant influx of students. We talked to people at a school that received about 180 students within 3 or 4 weeks. So you can imagine that that has some impact in schools. I won't bore you with methodological talk, although I'm happy to talk a lot about this. But we interview a lot of different stakeholders. We interview district level officials, interview school personnel, teachers, counselors, social workers, paraprofessionals, et cetera. And then we talk to families and community-based organizations that are organized to provide support for families. I won't talk in depth about this project, but I'm happy to talk about it for days. But what I want to talk about that connects to the idea of vulnerability. After Maria, it was clear that Puerto Rico's political status, as well as narratives about the inefficacy and corruption of government institutions, heavily influenced the kinds of care and support that Puerto Ricans receive from local and federal agencies. And this, to me, is in contrast to the support that people receive from family, from friends, from local community-based organizations who really quickly and effectively organized to make sure that they were providing supports to family who are, in this case, were deciding to relocate. And if you look at national discourse, this is just one example of many. It's centered around the deservingness of Puerto Ricans, right? Do they deserve our support, right? And a lot of it was leveraging citizenship, or sort of using citizenship as a way to justify or to make a claim that Puerto Ricans deserved aid, right? And around the time of the hurricane, I was in Michigan, and I'm looking at all major outlets in the US, I don't know, CNN, NBC, Fox News, all of it. And it was a constant reminder, the need to tell people, look, these are American citizens, right? There's devastation, but remember, they're American citizens. We're gonna provide aid, but remember, they're American citizens, right? So this need to constantly remind people of citizenship as a way to justify the support, right? And you see that, former Governor Rosselló also telling the president, look, we're American citizens, right? We deserve this support. We need this aid, right? And this second class, people talk about second class status citizenship. It sort of traveled with families. We saw in Florida efforts to prevent Puerto Rican people from voting in Florida, right? So the idea that these people are not going to be here for a long time, maybe they should not be allowed to vote as if that was an option, right? Legally an option, but sort of discouraging people from engaging in political participation in the state of Florida, particularly because of the perception that Puerto Ricans tend to vote Democratic, and that it would influence, or it would make Florida non-purple anymore, right? So this was a public discourse, right? This is someone who was running for office. I think he lost, but was still trying to do this, right? And what we found is that at the district, there was the same narrative, right? The idea that, the Mockingbird Public Schools consider themselves a receiving district. They talk to us about look, we got students from Harvey, we got students from Irma, we've gotten students, a lot of students because of political strife in Venezuela and the economic crisis in Venezuela. We've received students after the Haiti earthquakes, the earthquakes in Mexico. We know how to do this stuff. We get students all the time. And yet they were feeling the need to continually say, these are American citizens, we have to receive them in the school, right? So the idea that there was some pushback to the district providing services and support to students who were displaced by Hurricane Maria. So when students arrived in Florida, their educational experiences were in part influenced by narratives about the perceived differences between Puerto Rico and Florida institutions, right? And this narrative around, things are better in Florida, right? Academic expectations are higher, educational opportunities are better, students are coming into a district that is much better, so they're better off now that they're here. About perceptions about differences between the private and public school systems in Puerto Rico, quite a lot, across the board, we heard the same story. The students who came from private school, they're fine. They know English, they're prepared, they're easy to transition into the school system. Those who came from public schools, those are we have to put a lot of services and supports for those students. And we heard that at the district, we heard that in all 5 schools that we visited, and across different types of personnel. So you see that these narratives play out in ways that put at risk Puerto Rican students' access to quality education, right? The idea that some students are easier to plug in what we're already doing. Some students are really hard for us to integrate. And that impacted their access to rigorous coursework. So with strategies of, let's place students who were displaced from Maria, let's place them in the easy courses, the courses that don't have a high stakes test at the end, or we don't see as rigorous, so that they can more easily transition into the work. Now that has an impact. My colleague, Awilda Rodriguez, is a post-secondary transitions person. She's like, that has an impact on their access to post-secondary institutions, right? That is no small thing. And yet we found, again, sort of this tradition of resistance, ways in which the communities resisted this ideas. That doesn't mean that students' academic trajectories were not impacted, at least for some. So we talked to young people, and this young man stroked me, because he was talking about, look, I'm in the classroom, my teachers are not asking me questions, they're never calling my name, as if I'm not able to do this work, so I just started raising my hand and answering every question just to prove to them that I am just as capable as any other student who's here, right? So I'm taking agency. We also saw school personnel, lovely social studies teacher who actually was from Puerto Rico, who was saying, me and my colleague, we're sending kids back to the counselor. Like, look, these classes are too easy for you, I can see your potential. I'm gonna send you back and ask them to put you in more rigorous coursework, right? So people are finding ways of resisting these narratives about the ability and the preparedness of Puerto Rican students. And then we also found, talking to community organizations, a lot about advocacy around making sure that Florida recognized professional licenses so that people can find employment, providing housing support for families, and providing, helping students access educational services that they needed. So, fast forward to 2 years later, July of 2019, nearly 900 pages of text messages between Governor Rosselló and members of his circle were leaked. It was one of those moments like, do you remember what happened? Where you were when that happened? And it's like, I was driving, I think, to Upper Peninsula. If you look at Michigan, I live here. We're driving all the way here. It's like 4 hours. I was like looking at this information. And again, the messages included sexist attacks against female public officials, homophobic comments about superstar Ricky Martin, evidence of government manipulation of local media, and even a joke about the deaths of people during Hurricane Maria. In this moment, I mean, now, the people of Puerto Rico are still recovering, right, from the hurricane, the slow recovery. And then this happens, right? That triggered a massive movement that led to an unprecedented series of protests throughout Puerto Rico and the diaspora that really showed a Puerto Rico that was empowered, that was creative, united, and determined, despite heavy government repression. Now, people protested by walking, singing, dancing, doing yoga, kayaking, riding motorcycles, banging on pots and pans, doing street performances. It felt like every day there was a new way of protesting. And it was a movement that was as inclusive as it was powerful and creative. And eventually the governor resigns, but not without leaving a constitutional crisis that lasts for a couple of days while people are trying to figure out who's the governor now, right? And I remember at that point sort of looking at the Constitution of Puerto Rico, and I'm a literacy scholar, so I started reading and trying to figure out how the words help me understand what should happen now, right? So you think about that moment, as someone who is interested in social studies, what a wonderful moment for young people to think about, wait a second, what does our constitutional document say, right? How can we understand this situation and make judgments about the decisions that people in power are making that would have a serious impact on our livelihoods, right? What better moment to think about issues of constitutionality with young people, right? And then that leads us to today, where Puerto Rico, again, has been experiencing unprecedented seismic activity with 2 earthquakes causing significant damage in the southern coast of Puerto Rico, but once again revealing sources of risk and vulnerability for people. And I would argue that part of it has to do with the geographic location, right? That has to do something with the fact that there's a lot of seismic activity. It's not new, and yet sort of the volume and intensity seemed unprecedented. It sort of has forced us all to think about architectural or history of Puerto Rico, and also things around the politics of permit granting, right? So what about the ways in which things are built in Puerto Rico puts it in a vulnerable space? It has confronted people, and I think this is, to me, this has been, as someone who's in education, particularly important. Particularly caregivers, with the fear that government inefficiency and corruption may actually put your child's life at risk, right? So the distrust in governmental processes really making families think about, is my child gonna be safe in their school building? If something happens, are they gonna be receiving the kind of care, support, help that they need in case of another earthquake, right? So that distrust in the public institutions has been further eroded. So you see that distrust evident in social media campaigns that encourage people to not give donations to the government and to sort of think about whether they trust their government in delivering aid. Some of those fears materializing when aid started being distributed with sort of the names of politicians plastered on the bags, and the idea that, look, did you just hold the aid to make sure that you were printing the stickers to put on the bags? You know, why is this not being distributed? So what did the Puerto Rican do? Well, in their great legacy of resistance and political participation, they packed their cars and drove to the place where people were in need, right? So that distrust led to people just buying things and just taking their own cars and bodies to the places where they thought people needed help and distributing it there. That included sort of the tent schools, teachers teaching in tents as a way to minimize the disruption in the educational services for children, but also to teach in a place that felt safe, or safer, not really safe. And also they took to the streets to protest once again, particularly after the storage facility full of Hurricane Maria supplies was discovered, considering that those supplies is not being distributed during the hurricane, and now were not being distributed also during the current crisis. So people were fed up, right? And they took to the streets. So what can we learn? To me, Puerto Rican history in recent times is a really good case for illustrating this concept of vulnerability that requires a multidisciplinary lens, that requires knowledge and study that goes across disciplines, right? We talked about geography, history, civics as sort of core secondary social studies subjects. And we'll learn quite a bit about the Puerto Rico's legacy and capacity for critical consciousness and active resistance, which I think should also be an important thing to highlight. So if we go back to the instructional framework for the C3 framework, I will argue that we can sort of go through all of these steps and sort of examine the history of Puerto Rico, not just in Puerto Rico, not just for Puerto Rican children in the diaspora, but I think for children from other communities and other backgrounds, that an inquiry on Puerto Rican students' recent history, it is possible to engage in all of these steps of developing good questions, applying disciplinary tools, evaluating evidence, and communicating conclusions or taking action. So it is my hope that I have convinced you of 4 things, hopefully. If not, please let me know. That inquiry-based instruction leads to a productive engagement with social studies content, that really engaging in intellectually honest questions about the disciplines is an engaging thing to do. That vulnerability is a generative concept to ground that inquiry. That recent Puerto Rican history can and should be studied, both as it reveals vulnerability, but also as it encourages political resistance. And I hope that the history would also inspire young people and their teachers to engage in transformative action that impacts the livelihoods of their community. And with that, I thank you.
What you do with this, this idea that the teachers and administrators in Florida are clearly, they seem to be conflating language with skill level.
Yeah.
And sort of whether you're sort of just there as an observer or whether you're, kind of intervening and how those conversations go.
Yeah, well, we were working in partnership with the district. So what we did is that we produced a report back to the district saying these are the things that we found. Now, I don't want to make it seem like the district was, all they did was terrible, that it's not true. The district provided quite a substantive, amount of support. And we're arguing that support for basic, what we call sort of immediate needs was very successful, right? They provided clothing for families who arrived without clothing. They provided food, so they have food pantries in the schools, clothing closets that children could go in, and they provided things like school hoodies, right? So children are arriving in the winter after, living in Puerto Rico, so winter clothing, and so those sort of immediate needs, I think, were well addressed, and families received them well, right? Families would say, I arrived, I didn't have time or money to buy Christmas presents, and that was, as a parent, I can only imagine, and the school provided that, right? And that felt good, right? And there was this sort of welcoming narrative, like, you're here, you're our children, we're gonna welcome you. Now, I think that when that gets more complicated, it's at the provision of services that have to do with academic trajectories, and I think that's problematic. So we produced a report to the district and had conversation of what we have found. One of the things that were most surprised was the pushback, right? That there were teachers, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, here. That there were teachers who would say, I'm not fluent in Spanish, so don't send those kids to my classroom, right? Or that the school counselors, in their, a lot of them, really being deeply caring about students, say, I'm not gonna send you to that classroom because I know that teacher's not gonna be nice, right? Now, if that teacher's is teaching AP Physics, that has an impact on your ability to access post-secondary opportunity, right? So we sort of talked back to the district, and I think that we're surprised. Again, the district sees itself as a multicultural district. Like, we have people from all over the world. This is no issue. And we've had Puerto Rican students for a long time, right? This was not the first time Puerto Ricans landed in Central Florida, right? So that's kind of how we went about it. We sort of stayed in communication with the district. There were conversations about providing training for teachers on how to best serve Puerto Rican families, on sort of understanding the post-secondary landscape in Puerto Rico. So that was another thing that it's like some students want to go back to the University of Puerto Rico, but we don't know how the admissions process worked there. We don't know what they need to be able to go back. So there were sort of conversations about providing that kind of training to teachers so that they could point students to post-secondary opportunities here as well. Sí. Sí. Claro. Yo lo entiendo muy bien.
Vecina profesora Cucuta, del equipo de programa de estudio social e historia del Departamento de Educación de Puerto Rico. Quiero agradecer al profesor Loros por la invitación. Te quiero felicitar por traer a la atención el punto de cómo podemos extrapolar a la sala de clase el aprendizaje del verano 2019, ¿verdad? En todas estas áreas que mencionaste, sobre todo en el aspecto de la democracia participativa. En el programa de estudios social estamos trabajando, precisamente nos estamos reuniendo con las casas editoriales de Puerto Rico para ver cómo se va a abordar dentro de los textos este punto de vista de la manera más objetiva, trabajando el hecho histórico, y quiero resaltar la labor que está haciendo periodismo investigativo, que son quienes ¿verdad? Sacaron a la luz todo lo que ocurrió en el 2019, que es muy importante, y ese aspecto de la constitucionalidad que traíste dentro de la presentación es muy importante traerlo porque le dio la oportunidad a nuestros estudiantes de mirar nuestra constitución y nuestros documentos históricos. Sobre el aspecto de qué puntos hacen a Puerto Rico vulnerable, que mencionaste la condición geográfica, los recientes acontecimientos de los huracanes y sismos, a mí me preocupa mucho qué aprendizaje tenemos nuestros estudiantes en términos les llevamos a nuestros estudiantes en términos de la voluntariedad, en términos del trabajo que yo puedo hacer por Puerto Rico, que lo que le enseño en civismo lo pongo en ejecución en las situaciones en que Puerto Rico nos necesita, ¿verdad? Así que eso es un aspecto que me preocupa mucho. Y sobre, no vi que mencionaras nuestro devenir histórico, cómo nuestra historia afecta y nos ha traído hasta el día de hoy, ¿verdad? Quizás el asunto del estatus, que es un asunto inconcluso, nuestra situación colonial, cómo mucho tiene que ver con nuestra vulnerabilidad. Y también cuando hablamos de la yo creo que estamos en un momento, el punto de la corrupción está un poco trillado y te voy a decir por qué. Porque todos hablamos de la corrupción gubernamental, pero tenemos que señalar específicamente en qué áreas se pudo haber hecho qué y no se hizo en qué momento dado para poder nosotros mirar de manera planificada al futuro cómo lo podemos hacer. Por ejemplo, en el aspecto de la preparación de nuestras escuelas, ¿verdad? Cómo nuestras estructuras desde 1970, las estructuras que se construyeron previas a 1970 no cumplen con los parámetros, ¿verdad? Para los sismos, pero ¿qué nosotros? Porque yo creo que tenemos que dar un moving forward, ¿verdad? Dejar de hablar de corrupción, pero la sociedad tiene que empezar a dar soluciones, ¿verdad? Quizás alternativas de cómo podemos planificar para un futuro sin menos corrupción. E identificar aquellas cosas que tenemos que hacer para poder enfrentar situaciones como las de los sismos. Yo trabajé 2 semanas en los refugios en Guánica y ¿verdad? Sentimos allí fuertemente los sismos y vimos la condición de las personas y la condición emocional de la gente. Entonces, ¿dónde estamos ahora? ¿Qué hemos hecho con estas personas? Y proveerle al pueblo de Puerto Rico transparencia sobre lo que está ocurriendo, pero en todas las áreas, ¿verdad? Si se está haciendo algo bueno, hay que transmitirlo y decírselo al pueblo también para que la gente sienta un poco más de esperanza. Ese aspecto que tú mencionaste sobre los donativos, lo trabajé de cerca y fue muy triste porque en ocasiones es el gobierno municipal quien conoce la necesidad de sus ciudadanos directos, que sabe que doña Pancha, por ejemplo, en el barrio tal, tiene una necesidad de insulina y quizás mucha gente se volcó para el esfuerzo, pero a veces se beneficiaban las mismas personas y el que necesitaba realmente no le llegaban los suministros porque el pueblo no tenía noción, ¿verdad? En muchas ocasiones. Yo sé que el pueblo ha perdido la esperanza en sus instituciones, pero tenemos que recordar que quienes trabajan en esas instituciones también son puertorriqueños, también somos servidores públicos que estamos allí dando
Claro, no. Muy bienvenido el comentario, estoy muy de acuerdo. Y para mí, dos cosas. Una de las cosas que para mí es importante es que lo dije en la presentación, es la pérdida de confianza en las instituciones públicas, que me parece que no se puede refutar. Hay una erosión de la confianza en las instituciones públicas pero también, que es lo que quería, que me parece que es la mira al futuro, ¿no? Es una tradición realmente que para mí fue muy visible de esa participación democrática, y no estoy hablando de procesos democráticos como votaciones, estoy hablando de sentirse de que yo tengo el derecho de participar en procesos políticos, en procesos sociales, y de exigir, ¿no? De exigir transparencia, de exigir la dignidad, ¿no? que uno merece del gobierno que representa al pueblo, ¿no? Estoy de acuerdo, o sea, mi colega Wilda, que su familia es de Guayanilla, y estuvo en Guayanilla, en algún momento decía, Dios mío, aquí la gente viene a darle a mami más agua y mami no necesita más agua. Mami dice, Dios mío, ya me están tomando la puerta cada 10 minutos, con la gente obviamente con mucha buena intención. Pero entonces tienes un proceso comunitario que quizás no llega a tener sus ineficiencias por precisamente la falta de confianza en las instituciones, ¿no? Entonces la falta de confianza en que el gobierno va a manejar las cosas de manera eficiente, eficaz y con respeto al pueblo. Ahora, en términos de la mira al futuro, para mí es, hablando de estos marcos educativos, que el Departamento de Educación lo reconoce también, ¿no? de que parte de la meta de las ciencias sociales es que los estudiantes tengan la oportunidad viste, es que el lenguaje profesional está en otro idioma, de trabajar, de estudiar estos procesos sociales y políticos de mira a el desarrollo de las destrezas y las disposiciones para la participación cívica, ¿no? Entonces, para mí, en términos educativos, ese es el argumento. Cómo uno envuelve a los estudiantes en este estudio honesto sobre la situación de Puerto Rico, tanto los problemas como la capacidad de resistencia del pueblo de Puerto Rico, con el propósito de que tengan una participación cívica y política que extienda por el resto de su adultez, ¿no? Am I off the hook? No? Oh, thank you. Gracias. Tim.
¿Dónde está? No, pues necesito la... Juan.
Está medio raro eso.
Sí.
Ah, sale ahí, espérate.
Ah, ok. Entonces,
Creo que hay que poner presenters o algo así.
sí, tengo todas las presentaciones en
Es que
Claro,
yo no,
pero
una
que
carpeta,
aquí-
pero...
yo no había
mejor la casa de José Alpici, yo no.
No, yo no sé.
No, pero es que creo que hay que ponerlo aquí como presenter.
Sí, pero no sé.
No sé.
A ver si Manuel sabe.
¿Verdad, Manuel?
Problemas
Tus
técnicos.
talentos son requeridos.
Porque justamente para cuando me paro, sí, porque voy a pasar par de fotografía y
Sí, sí, sí. Claro.
quiero saber dónde está y si puedo manejarlo.
Así pues, digo.
Tirando para allá.
¿Qué?
¿Me está tirando para allá?
No.
Ajá, no.
Por ahí sale view. O sea, aquí hay algo. Es que no encontramos ni siquiera cosas.
Ok. ¿Dónde está el cursor aquí?
Ok, yo no puse la mía todavía en la computadora.
Cuando conecta.
Ve, yo ya dejé,
Narrativa TT.
sí,
Ok.
sin,
Dale.
yo soy la primera que presento,
Ya.
pero solo quiero ver para después no estar aquí peleando frente a la gente y no saber bregar con...
Oye,
Eh,
estamos aquí. ¿Todo?
por ahora parece que sí.
Sí. A él te puedes
Ok,
preguntarle lo del botón.
Sí, pero no entiendo
No, yo tampoco.
el
Es que
problema, ¿no?
por eso hay que...
What happened?
¿Tú ya la sacaste? O
Ah,
sea,
no. Ok,
ellos
no,
dicen
abrí
no,
directo.
porque yo,
Sí, sí.
yo
ellos
me
quieren
imagino que como
transmitir la
otra gente va a presentar,
imagen a través de otra página de ellos.
solo quiero estar segura.
Ok, ok, ok.
Sí.
Ok. Voy a estar 15 minutos. Esto fuera, ¿verdad?
¿Mm?
15 minutos que estamos fuera.
Fuera no, porque me tienen que presentar.
Pero no van a hacer, no te van a estar pantallando.
No, sí,
Me siento mucho.
en canal.
Ay, no soy tan enana también. ¿Qué? Porque me dijo que no soy tan enana.
Sí.
No sé si es mejor presentar allá o aquí mismo.
Eso le
Porque
estaba diciendo yo a Carolina que se siente mal porque entonces
Mira, que
presentar
Wendy nos
después.
tomó una foto. Entonces,
¿Qué, qué?
saliendo Wendy, mira. Que Wendy nos tomó una foto.
Ay, Dios mío.
Ah,
Wendy nos
qué
está...
cabrona.
Pregúntale si nos vemos en el público.
Yo no sé si... ¿Dónde carajo está la cámara?
Allá atrás, lo del medio, el puntito azul.
¿Cómo aquí, Wendy? ¿Qué tengo?
No sé si lo presento allá o aquí mismo.
Bueno, lo malo es quién te va a correr la
Si
presentación.
alguien me puede coger la presentación,
Exacto.
pues me quedo ahí sentada. Eso
Ok,
es.
mira, la tuya está aquí, narrativa TT.
Sí.
No,
El
pero que
desktop.
está bien enfocado.
La
Si no,
tuya está
cualquier
aquí
cosa,
abajo.
yo
Eso
paso
está
la
ok.
tuya y tú pasas la mía. Tú tienes cosas que...
Sí,
¿Sí?
quid pro quo.
Sí, no, o sea, yo no tenía a alguien aquí solo para pasarla. Imagínate.
No, y yo no voy a hacer.
Claro
No,
que no.
miren para acá.
Atrás,
Eso
nos llama, tenemos un WhatsApp de audio.
Niña.
que en Wendy.
Quería...
Ok,
¿Aló?
mira.
Es que lo que pasa es que la señal en este anfiteatro está mala.
Vas a venir aquí.
No, no conecta.
Bueno, de
Mala
presentations
señal.
en open, ¿verdad? Vienes aquí browse.
Mala señal.
Ya me sé.
Ok, 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 ok. Vamos a ver. Bueno, mira, la tuya está aquí ya abierta.
Ok.
Así que ya la... Ah, no, pero te la va a buscar aquí. En este de aquí, ¿no?
Es que la señal
No
en
es
este
aquí.
anfiteatro es
Vas a
malísima.
tener que venir aquí. Vas a tener que venir aquí en browse.
Ok.
Y de aquí ya está en el desktop. Mírala aquí.
¿Qué color?
Narrativa TT.
Ok.
Déjame bajarle un poquito.
Cuando... Yo te la voy a dejar abierta porque es que... Si la tuya es la primera, yo entiendo que te la puedo dejar abierta.
Aquí la tuya. Ay, por ahí yo...
Ok, déjame abrir la de Carolina, la de Camila.
Oh, bárbaros.
Sí, no, pero es porque la tuya va a estar aquí abierta. Dile a Wendy ¿Me sigue?
Open browse.
Y aquí está la tuya.
Vale, perfecto.
Y ya la abres, ¿ok? Así que esta es la de Camila que está abierta ya.
Vale.
Busca la pausa aquí. Ok.
¿Listo?
Quiero bajar las presentaciones de Michigan también.
Va a traer el clip.
Ay, ¿qué es? Chat.
Juan, where is the internet? Hola. Ah, señor de Cúcuta, un gusto, Timothy. No, gracias por la pregunta. Sí, sí. Sí, en el futuro, sí, sí, sí. Queremos crecer
Te estoy viendo desde allá. Espera, que tengo que pegar.
Sí, 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 sí. Sí, bueno, sí. Nos gustaría que en el futuro podemos invitar los docentes, los maestros. Gracias, gracias. Bueno, y gracias por venir. Where?
Let me get this for you guys.
And then can I get onto my email so I can download?
Okay. Well, if they're going to be running the PowerPoint, if you get into your email, you're going to be freezing the PowerPoint.
Can I download them from my two PowerPoints from my email? Because,
You can, but if
Okay.
they're going to start now,
no, yeah, before they start.
okay, yeah, you just go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Se te va a apagar cuando le das next, debe presentar. Cuando usted esté, le va a dar. Déjame un segundo. Dame. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to try it out. Ok. Que como le estás haciendo otra cosa acá, pues te despego.
See?
Use the PowerPoint.
Yeah. I can just do this?
Yeah.
No, down.
Download. Desktop, yeah, that's all right.
It's okay.
And put your name on it.
But can we say U of M? Yeah.
Remember to sign out.
Yeah. I need to install this file stream.
I don't know. What did you create? A PowerPoint or?
Hold on, let me see. I don't think that was. I think I need to go back.
Vulnerabilidad. Quizás que nos ayudarán a poder hacer qué tipo de herramientas pueden ser los papás donde puedan integrar
Y un intercambio de ideas también, porque por ejemplo, yo trabajo con la gente en la facultad de educación, pero mi problema, por ejemplo, dentro de nuestro programa
That's
se
what I
llama
want, yeah.
currículo pedagógico. Entonces, si vamos a desarrollar algo que refuerce este tipo de sería mejor tener un intercambio, escuchar de ellos lo que necesitan, necesitan apoyo de recursos, cosas así de los estudios globales.
Encuentras si necesitas, por ejemplo, datos sobre nuestro currículo, yo creo que nosotros tenemos acceso a la disponibilidad, tenemos disponibilidad sistemas informáticos vulnerables igual que el mercado, tenemos expectativas que van al tema específico de los proyectos que trabajamos también en el contexto de Puerto Rico.
Sí, la verdad.
Nosotros en este momento estamos haciendo revisión curricular. Y uno de los que se puede hacer que yo trato de una vez hacer es cómo la situación y el contexto actual de Puerto Rico y las necesidades de las familias es un gran aprendizaje para mis hijos. Me están trayendo una oportunidad de poner los mismos que yo le hablo en el pasado los niños sobre un sismo y ahora ellos lo circulan. Y ahora ellos saben lo que es una falla y ahora saben el ejemplo de la placa. Tenemos tan hábiles en estos momentos para unos temas y en otros necesitamos como te digo, saber cuál es la estrategia para utilizar para actualizar ese aprendizaje.
Yeah, they're all there. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna do that now.
Dame un momento. Un momento, tú sabes que también me gustaría visibilizar la participación de educación.
Okay.
I can do my slides.
Yes, so I
Okay.
just pulled yours up. Which one is? What was the name of it? Was
I
it?
think it's a hirano. It's pale, maybe this one? No.
Here.
Oh, okay.
There's yours. So
Great.
yeah, so there's yours. And
Thank you.
just minimize that. And which one were we?
This will be that one. That one.
That one's first.
Let
Yeah.
me check that.
So I think we're gonna start our first panel, both of grad students from both the Universidad de Puerto Rico and the University of Michigan. By the way, I think I just figured out that when I gave everybody the welcome, I did not say who I was, and you have no clue. So my name is Juan Hernandez Garcia. I'm the chair of the graduate history program here at the Universidad de Puerto Rico. So welcome again, everybody. This first panel is titled Las vulnerabilidades de identidad, the vulnerabilities of identity. And each presenter has around 15 minutes, and then at the end, some couple of minutes for questions. So our first presenter, who's going to present in Spanish, is Camila Dutra Fontura. Camila got her master's degree from the Pontificia Universidad Católica in Porto Alegre in Rio Grande do Sul, in Brazil, and is now doing her PhD here at the History Department in the Universidad de Puerto Rico. The title of her paper in English is Photographing Narratives in Puerto Rico, A Sensible View of Boricua Culture, Narrativas Fotográficas en Puerto Rico, Una mirada sensible sobre la cultura boricua. If you want it in Portuguese, it's also there, Narrativas Fotográficas en Puerto Rico. Así que los dejo con Camila.
Thank you. Buenos días a todos. Para hoy decidí compartir con ustedes un poco acerca de aspectos más metodológicos de una investigación realizada anteriormente para la maestría en una comunidad puertorriqueña que se llama Tras Talleres. Así que mi intención es hablar más acerca de la fotografía, de la metodología, de la antropología visual, y no tanto de la investigación algo más profundizado, obviamente por los límites de tiempo también, o consideraciones resultados, sino explorar la idea de investigaciones más interdisciplinarias. Actualmente, para el doctorado estoy trabajando en una investigación histórica, antropología, usando las metodologías, ¿verdad?, tanto de la antropología como de la historia. Y para esta investigación se realizó un trabajo etnográfico en esa comunidad puertorriqueña localizada en Santurce. Se trabajó conceptos como identidad en la posmodernidad, comunidades nacionales, cuestiones del nacionalismo, de la memoria, para tratar de entender cómo las personas se relacionaban con ese espacio, se identificaba cuestiones más identitarias, ¿verdad?, de la realidad puertorriqueña. Bueno, dicho eso, la cuestión más metodológica y también como reto personal mío para tal investigación, aparte del trabajo etnográfico, de observaciones, de entrevistas, fue utilizar otra herramienta que para mí era totalmente nueva, que era la fotografía. Explorar las potencialidades de las imágenes y de la fotografía como una otra narrativa. No solamente, aparte de la narrativa textual, explorar, cuestionar y utilizar la imagen y la fotografía también como parte del análisis del cuerpo, del estudio y del trabajo como tal. Y también justamente resaltar que la fotografía o las narrativas fotográficas utilizadas como metodología en la investigación no son meramente fuentes o dispositivos ilustrativos, sino que también traen cuerpo y análisis para el texto. No solamente le voy a enseñar la foto, eso fue lo que pasó y ya. No, eso también configuran narrativas que explican, enseñan distintos puntos, ¿verdad?, de la realidad que está siendo analizada. Trae también cuestiones subjetivas, por supuesto. Y también pensando en el tema del Congreso y la cuestión del salón de clase, de también instigar a los estudiantes a abrir la mirada también y las posibilidades en sus trabajos, en sus investigaciones, en sus estudios, de poder también trabajar de manera más interdisciplinar, de utilizar distintas herramientas, así como la fotografía u otros dispositivos de audio, video, etcétera, etcétera. Así que nada, solo para dar ese breve contexto, yo estuve haciendo ese trabajo etnográfico en esta comunidad durante el periodo de 4 meses. Yo frecuentaba el centro comunitario diariamente, todas las semanas. Pude participar, interactuar con las personas que estaban ahí para entender, percibir cómo la gente se relacionaba con ese espacio, cuáles eran sus demandas, cómo funcionaban sus relaciones, etcétera, etcétera. Justamente también por esa comunidad se localiza anteriormente donde era un mangle, hay también mucha historia de resistencia de ese lugar, ¿verdad? Cómo la gente se apropia de ese espacio. Yo había hecho, hay muchas fotografías, me di cuenta que en la presentación hay fotografías de Puerto Rico, de distintas partes más turísticas como el Viejo San Juan, otras áreas de Santurce, de la Plaza del Mercado, pero creo que sería interesante enseñar un poco más de las narrativas del barrio, de cómo fueron las relaciones en el centro, los distintos talleres que se brindaban en el centro, actividades, fiestas que son importantes, ¿verdad?, para la comunidad. Voy a pasar más rápidamente estas primeras fotografías que enseñan un poco, ¿verdad?, de partes más icónicas, vamos a decir así, de la isla, para después enfocar en las narrativas de la comunidad. Bueno, la portada, ¿verdad?, de El Morro. Eso es algo bien común que pasa por el calor de Puerto Rico. Los niños aprovechan mucho, ¿verdad?, la posibilidad de refrescarse, de interactuar con ese espacio. Esa mujer, esa persona, estaba sentada al lado mío, yo estaba sentada con la cámara y ella simplemente empezó a hablar conmigo en inglés. Y yo dije, no, puede hablar en español. Yo soy brasileña, pero hablo español. Y en media hora me cuenta toda su historia y de la isla, cómo ella veía la relación de la isla con Estados Unidos, etcétera, y yo le pedí para sacar una foto. Algunas cuestiones más simbólicas, ¿verdad?, de la bandera, de algo que está muy presente y es reiterada y ¿verdad?, reforzada en la cultura boricua. Y eso también me gustaría de hablar un poquito, hablando de esas cuestiones más metodológicas y de método como tal. Yo no soy fotógrafa. Yo me acerqué de la antropología visual, cogiendo disciplinas. Yo creo que hay que llevar en cuenta todo eso. Algunos límites, dudas, cuestionamientos, cuestiones que son más subjetivas cuando uno va a investigar y no nos enseñan. Desde aprender a manejar el equipo, ¿verdad?, la cámara, cómo acercarse de la gente, si uno va a registrar cosas que son de cerca, de lejos, la cuestión del permiso, del consentimiento, cuáles voy a utilizar, qué quiero transmitir. Hay múltiples preguntas que uno como investigador lo hace, así como en las entrevistas, cuáles voy a utilizar. O sea, mi intención aquí es básicamente hablar un poco de esa experiencia más personal en cuestiones metodológicas, pero también para uno preguntarse, cuestionarse como investigador o también acerca de las metodologías, etcétera, de abrir ese espacio más en los salones de clase para trabajar el interdisciplinario y las distintas herramientas y potencialidades en sus trabajos, en sus estudios. Bueno, a cuestión del barrio como tal, tras talleres, esa primera narrativa, yo no voy a hablar mucho porque el nombre ya se dice, las imágenes están ahí, y eso abre espacio para distintas interpretaciones. Por eso que digo que hay muchas cuestiones más subjetivas, ¿verdad? Pero el texto también puede ser bastante subjetivo, ¿no? Así que esa es más bien la cuestión de la estética del barrio, de los murales, de los colores. La cuestión de la bandera también siempre muy presente, ¿verdad? Y ese orgullo, esa construcción identitaria de unos otros boricuas, que somos orgullosos, ¿verdad?, de nuestra isla. Es un barrio también bien musical. De ahí salieron grandes nombres de la salsa, músicos, cantantes, eh, que es otra cuestión también bien fuerte, la cultura, ¿verdad? La cuestión de la música, de los ritmos, y ese más bien algo de la estética del barrio como tal, lo que se estaba haciendo de obras, ¿verdad? Y eso sí, por parte del gobierno, de algunas casas que se estaban trabajando. Esa es la ubicación del centro comunitario como tal, la calle Verdeja con la calle Rosa. Ese es el centro. Es un centro que por mucha lucha y resistencia de los mismos moradores, residentes de la comunidad, se organizaron para luchar por sus demandas. Ellos, a través de las entrevistas que yo realicé, estaba mucho la cuestión de la autogestión, de ellos mismos buscar en sus alternativas, sus demandas, lo que es necesario para, ¿verdad? Tener una vida un poco más digna para la gente que vive ahí. Así que también el centro hizo parte de muchos proyectos como el del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Puerto Rico, el proyecto Santurce, no solamente esa comunidad como otras que disponibilizaban distintos talleres para la gente. Y uno de ellos era la clase de bomba para los niños, que era una cosa, es un trabajo bien bonito, pues es seguir llevando una danza típica, tradicional de Puerto Rico a las nuevas generaciones. Y estar ahí en el centro, conviviendo con las personas, viendo los niños llegar corriendo de la escuela, ese era un momento de mucha descontracción. Y ellos estaban ensayando también en una presentación que va a pasar después un poquito, de la fiesta del Día de las Madres, que también es una celebración bien importante, la cuestión familiar obviamente bien sagrada para la gente. Eh, la profesora era voluntaria, ella hacía parte de ese proyecto del Museo de Arte de Puerto Rico. Y era un momento de mucho relajo. A mí, yo vacilaba, como se dice, mucho, acompañando y por tener la oportunidad, ¿verdad?, de participar de todo eso. Y uno también pensando en esos cuestionamientos, ¿verdad?, como investigador de, de las elecciones que uno tiene que hacer, que también son bien subjetivas, está la cuestión más de cuando se dice y se busca una neutralidad o un distanciamiento de los sujetos de estudio, es bien difícil conseguir una neutralidad 100% en una investigación. Uno se hace distintas preguntas, pero siempre lleva algo de uno para sus trabajos, su equipaje, su vivencia. Así que en ese sentido, estamos con esos puntos de tensión todo el tiempo cuando uno está investigando la cuestión de la autoridad, etcétera, etcétera. Ese era otro de los talleres, que era de los huertos caseros, también era algo muy interesante para la gente que se brindaba al centro. Algunas imágenes. Yo tampoco llegué al centro con una cámara y un grabador. También está esa cuestión de todo el proceso de cómo acercarse del lugar, de poco a poco conocer las personas. Es también un otro pequeño reto que no nos enseña y uno va aprendiendo mientras se va literalmente entrando en el campo, en la investigación. La bohemia de los domingos es también hablando y conectando con la cuestión de la música, ¿verdad? Y el barrio de Tras Talleres específicamente por los músicos y la gente que nacieron en el barrio, que son bien importantes. Es también otro momento que se ve la conexión familiar de la gente que vive ahí, de aprovechar lo máximo posible de ese espacio. Y tiene mucho esa cuestión de, como había dicho, ¿verdad?, del acercarse, de la fotografía, del consentimiento. sea una foto sacada de lejos, sea robada, como decimos, si, ¿verdad? Si hubo el acercamiento. Y cuando uno conoce a la gente, se abren el espacio, miren, saca una foto de nosotros, porque es literalmente que uno no puede llegar así, ¿verdad? En el espacio, es una construcción, ¿verdad? También de, de llegar al espacio y conocer a la gente. Me encanta. Pues solo también para hablar brevemente, ¿verdad? Esa fue una fiesta también muy bien planificada. Yo me quedé impactada cómo la gente se organizó, se movilizó para el Día de las Madres. Eh, yo también tuve mi participación en la organización. Literalmente algunas muchachas, unos jóvenes hicieron como que con los nombres equipo de organización. Y usted va a buscar esto, ustedes van a servir la comida, se consiguieron donaciones, la gente llevó comida de casa y todo para hacer un día perfecto para homenajear a las madres. Que también con mucha comida, con música, había música en vivo y también fue una experiencia bien bonita que yo pude presenciar. Está también la fiesta de la Cruz, que es una fiesta más religiosa, pero yo ya me había ido, vuelta a Brasil. En ese sentido, uno puede tratar de transmitir lo máximo posible en un texto, ¿verdad? En una narrativa, en una investigación. Y la fotografía puede traer más posibilidades. Es otra, tiene una potencia distinta, pero se agrega, compone junto con el texto, se construye junto. El punto es hablar de, mira, la presentación que yo estaba ensayando en la clase de bombas, después se presentaron en la fiesta. Acerca de la fotografía y del texto, una no sobrepone la otra, no hay una pelea o lo que es más formal, etcétera, lo que es más aceptado, sino esa simbiosis, esa interrelación que se puede llegar utilizando la fotografía como narrativa también, imagética, de imagen como tal. Y hablando de la cuestión más identitaria, de orgullo, aquí está una pequeña descripción de qué es ser un morador de Trastalleres, del trastallerense. Por eso, como les dije, el trabajo, la investigación, hay otras narrativas, más fotografías y obviamente traje un poquito, hay una narrativa que son los retratos de la gente que pues se trabajó toda la cuestión identitaria, de memoria, de espacio de Puerto Rico, pero bajo los lentes de las personas que están en esa comunidad. Así que también se dedicó un espacio para retratar esas personas. Y nada, yo sé que... Muchas gracias. Thank you.
¿Puedes poner tu presentación?
¿Está bien?
Sí.
So as she goes to put on her PowerPoint, our next presenter is Carolina Tovar Vargas. Carolina is a PhD student here at the Graduate History Program. She's actually also a teacher at the Bogota Department of Education in Colombia. So she sort of straddles both as a teacher and as a PhD candidate in history. And a lot of her research work is actually on slavery in the Caribbean, especially in Cartagena in Colombia. The title in English of her presentation is Afro-Colombian Identity at School, Initiatives from Public Policy in Education in Colombia. In Spanish, Afrocolombianidad en la Escuela, Iniciativas desde las Políticas Públicas en Educación para Colombia. Así que los dejo con Carolina.
Muchas gracias, buenos días.
Trata de estar bien cerca.
Ok, gracias, buenos días. Bueno, como les comentaba ahorita Juan, básicamente comentarles que soy colombiana, estudiante del programa graduado de Historia de esta Universidad de Puerto Rico. tengo experiencia como docente en educación pública en la ciudad de Bogotá, donde he trabajado ya durante 15 años. Mis intereses investigativos, que están relacionados con las culturas afrodescendientes, pues además mi experiencia docente me han llevado un poco a esta reflexión que preparé para ustedes el día de hoy acerca de este tema de la afrocolombianidad en la escuela y las iniciativas desde las políticas públicas en la educación para Colombia. Voy a compartirles entonces algunas imágenes de unos documentos que está manejando en este momento la Secretaría de Educación del Distrito para trazar unos lineamientos en torno a lo que es la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos que debe implementarse en las instituciones educativas en toda Colombia. Colombia ha presentado avances significativos en materia de multiculturalidad y de plurietnicidad a partir de la promulgación de la Constitución Política en 1991, que se encuentra actualmente en vigencia. Desde la entrada en curso de la Constitución, se ha planteado que el carácter pluriétnico y multicultural es un elemento constitutivo de la nacionalidad colombiana. Esto corresponde a las tendencias crecientes en el mundo que avanzan hacia el reconocimiento de la diversidad como base de la integración social y la convivencia pacífica. Para el Estado colombiano, el reconocimiento de la diversidad de su población se ha planteado como un imperativo para la consolidación del orden democrático deseado. Respecto a esta imagen en específico de la cartilla de las que les estoy hablando, me parece interesante ver particularmente contradictorio el hecho de que la Secretaría de Educación incluya una imagen que realmente remite al pasado propio africano, pero no como tal a la afrocolombianidad. Los elementos que se pueden observar en esta imagen realmente no son muy correspondientes con, digamos, la imagen de los afrodescendientes en Colombia prácticamente en ninguna etapa de la historia colombiana. Esto es un poco el contexto legal de los lineamientos de la Cátedra Afrocolombiana. En ese nuevo marco constitucional, a partir de la década de 1990, surgieron acciones que involucran al sistema educativo. En 1993, la Ley 70 creó la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos. En 1994 se promulgó la Ley General de Educación, que está vigente en este momento, y sobre la cual avanzan todas estas legislaciones. En 1998, el decreto 1122, que ordenó la obligatoriedad de la cátedra. En 2001, el Ministerio de Educación Nacional publicó los lineamientos curriculares para la Cátedra de Afrocolombianidad. En este punto es necesario entonces establecer dos precisiones. La primera, ¿qué se entiende por lineamientos curriculares en Colombia? Y la segunda, ¿qué es la Cátedra de Afrocolombianidad? Los lineamientos curriculares son orientaciones pedagógicas que define el Ministerio de Educación Nacional con el apoyo de la comunidad escolar de todo el país para liderar el proceso de planeación de las áreas obligatorias y fundamentales definidas por la Ley General de Educación. Los lineamientos curriculares existen para tales áreas y también fueron creados para la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos. Estos lineamientos curriculares específicamente indican que el reconocimiento y el respeto a la diversidad no se plantearon desde la Constitución Política para ser aplicados únicamente a la formación escolar de los afrodescendientes nacionales, sino que lo que pretende la cátedra es que toda la población escolar conozca y valore los aportes de los afrocolombianos a la formación de la nación para que realmente tenga sentido la apuesta oficial por la interculturalidad. En cuanto a la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos, hay que decir que es una iniciativa que procura el cumplimiento de las obligaciones relacionadas con la elaboración de la política pública educativa para las instituciones de educación básica y media, con miras a la reivindicación de los pueblos afrocolombianos. Cabe destacar en este punto que Colombia es el tercer país con mayor presencia de población afrodescendiente en el continente americano, después de los Estados Unidos y Brasil. Sobre la cátedra, se estableció que no constituyera una asignatura adicional al plan de estudios, sino que debía ser un proyecto institucional transversal que surcara todas las áreas del conocimiento. Sin embargo, el liderazgo de esta cátedra ha sido asumido por el área de Ciencias Sociales, que corresponde a las clases de Historia, Geografía, Constitución Política y Democracia, que yo lidero en la ciudad de Bogotá, para los niveles de educación preescolar básica y media que corresponden a las escuelas elemental, intermedia y superior del sistema norteamericano. A partir de la creación de esta cátedra, comenzó a generarse un proceso pedagógico enfocado en la reflexión permanente desde la escuela acerca de la importancia de los aportes de la población afrodescendiente a la sociedad colombiana. En ese proceso se han publicado algunos materiales de orden nacional o local para apoyar al cuerpo docente en la implementación de la cátedra en distintos contextos. Sin embargo, es importante poner de relieve una discusión aplazada. Esta imagen muestra un poco la cuestión de la distribución de los chicos, de los estudiantes en las escuelas colombianas y deja ver que realmente en la mayor parte del territorio nacional la población afrodescendiente está muy desigualmente distribuida. Este mapa, por ejemplo, nos muestra la distribución espacial de la población afrocolombiana en Colombia y puede verse allí que realmente, aunque en la mayor parte de los departamentos de las unidades administrativas colombianas hay algún grado de presencia de población afrodescendiente, realmente se concentran y son mayoritarios en las regiones costeras tanto del Caribe como del Pacífico y en parte de la región amazónica. Adicionalmente a todo esto hay que hablar acerca del concepto de afrocolombianidad. El concepto de afrocolombiano, de acuerdo con la Comisión de Expertos del Ministerio de Educación Nacional, que trazó los lineamientos curriculares, es paradójicamente polémico y poco debatido. Según ellos, en diversos eventos académicos sobre asuntos afrocolombianos, el concepto no ha sido objeto de discusión suficiente, a pesar de la referencia a temas que podrían justificar un debate. En Colombia, en múltiples contextos se utilizan indistintamente los términos negro o afrocolombiano, y no se sabe si es porque se les considera sinónimos o porque no se cree que sea importante dar una discusión al respecto. Para la propuesta de la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos, se estableció la necesidad de problematizar estos conceptos para debatirlos ante la comunidad educativa nacional con la posibilidad de extender la discusión a las comunidades y a la población afrocolombiana en general. Desde el Ministerio de Educación se ha asumido que no basta manifestar cómo no se quiere ser denominado, también se debe saber cómo se quiere ser llamado, incluso entre los miembros de las comunidades étnicas más vulnerables del territorio nacional. Según los expertos del Ministerio de Educación Nacional, entre la población con ascendencia africana en algún grado, la palabra negro ofende a muchos de sus miembros, porque les recuerda las dolorosas marcas del pasado colonial esclavista que sometió a las personas africanas, reduciéndolos al color de la piel, racializado y estereotipado. Hay quienes creen que se les quitó su nombre, su historia, su cultura, su dignidad, el derecho a ser reconocidos como personas y se les redujo despectivamente a negros, como sinónimo de animales esclavizados y subordinados. Por ello, hay quienes reclaman su reconocimiento como miembros del pueblo afrocolombiano, con todas las cargas culturales que ello puede implicar. En cualquier caso, el término afrocolombiano es aún objeto de discusión por parte de quienes creen que ya no se tiene un vínculo histórico con África. Otros usan y entienden el concepto de diferentes maneras y algunos ni siquiera saben lo que realmente significa. En otras posturas, hay quienes sostienen que la distinción entre afrocolombiano y negro tiene matices de clase social y sobre todo de nivel educativo. Los intelectuales se identifican como afrocolombianos, mientras que la gente del común se caracteriza como negro o integrante de una comunidad negra. El término negro, si bien es algo impuesto por el otro o por otro, también es asimilado como parte de la identidad tradicional de los afrodescendientes. En los lineamientos curriculares se sostiene que el término afrocolombiano surge de la necesidad del colectivo y sus individuos de poseer un referente identitario, con un reconocimiento del ser humano negro, su humanidad y sus raíces culturales africanas y colombianas. Es muy paradójico que a este tiempo de la vida aún se siga pretendiendo dar esa lucha por el reconocimiento de la humanidad de las negritudes en todo el mundo. El Ministerio de Educación Nacional lo adoptó para crear una conciencia política de la etnicidad negra como una realidad sociocultural destacada en Colombia. Al tratarse de un debate intenso, el Ministerio de Educación resolvió considerar como ejercicio de reflexión teórico y metodológico la propuesta de utilizar el concepto de afrocolombiano en el contexto de su significado histórico, plasmando así en la esencia de la cátedra la voluntad de seguir avanzando en la conceptualización de un proceso de construcción identitaria, colectivo y participativo, que incluyera a toda la comunidad educativa a nivel nacional. En cuanto a la materialización de la política pública, con base en los lineamientos curriculares para la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos, la Secretaría de Educación del Distrito Capital, para la que yo trabajo, ha formulado y presentado distintas iniciativas pedagógicas tendientes al cumplimiento de las obligaciones asumidas por el Estado colombiano, para lo que ha sido presentado por parte de las administraciones recientes como la consolidación de un orden democrático. Es decir, hay una formulación de una política pública propia del distrito que obedece desde el contexto local a la política trazada para el territorio nacional. Como este es un proceso permanente desde la cátedra implantada desde 1990, se ha procurado mantener el interés por la implementación de la cátedra como una estrategia encaminada a la reducción de la desigualdad entre los bogotanos, de acuerdo con el plan de desarrollo vigente y en correspondencia tanto con la normatividad local como con la internacional. Cabe destacar que entre la población bogotana específicamente es flotante el porcentaje de población afrodescendiente, porque por cuestiones del conflicto interno que todavía vive Colombia, muchas veces la población afrodescendiente es desplazada de sus territorios de procedencia y deben llegar a Bogotá a ampliar los círculos de pobreza, y así es como se integran a la comunidad educativa bogotana. Para el año 2020, la Secretaría de Educación Distrital entregó a los docentes de las escuelas y colegios de su jurisdicción una serie de materiales, entre los que se cuenta este manual del que les estoy hablando y cuyas imágenes les estoy proyectando, de normas generales para la implementación de la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos en las instituciones educativas de la ciudad. El documento está estructurado con base tanto en los estándares curriculares definidos por el Ministerio de Educación a nivel nacional, como por la normatividad relacionada con los derechos humanos en acuerdos establecidos por la comunidad internacional. Este manual pretende familiarizar a los docentes y estudiantes y demás miembros de las instituciones educativas con la dinámica de la formulación de políticas públicas orientadas al fortalecimiento de la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos. En él se define por política pública un conjunto de objetivos considerados necesarios y deseables, tratados por una institución u organización gubernamental para orientar a individuos o colectivos hacia la transformación de una realidad que requiere de acciones concretas. Para el caso, la visibilización y exaltación de la población afrocolombiana al interior de las instituciones educativas. El manual propone, en primer lugar, las siguientes fases para el diseño de materiales y actividades pedagógicas en el marco de la cátedra. Primero, la iniciación o planteamiento del problema, el diseño preliminar de objetivos, aproximación a los conceptos, proyección de alcances y posibilidades, selección de opciones posibles. Segundo, la implementación, el desarrollo de procedimientos, lineamientos y actividades propias de la política pública, pero al nivel de la escuela propiamente dicha, Tercero, la evaluación de los objetivos alcanzados. Y cuarto, el seguimiento a los resultados. Todo esto se supone que se direcciona hacia que en las escuelas los maestros, en compañía con los padres de familia y los estudiantes de toda la comunidad, no solamente los afrodescendientes, estén todo el tiempo en este proceso. Lamentablemente, realmente ni la jornada escolar ni el año lectivo completo dan lugar a que haya bastante reflexión. Realmente el proceso se reduce básicamente a unos días en el mes de mayo en que se celebra como tal la fiesta de la afrocolombianidad y no tiene, digamos, el alcance que debería tener, dada esta discusión larga que tiene desde ya aproximadamente 30 años la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos. Bueno, el manual además señala las normas que deben regir la política pública en favor de la población afrocolombiana, comenzando por la misma Constitución Política Nacional en el artículo 93. Con base en esas normas, el manual establece un protocolo a seguir en las instituciones educativas, que comienza por el reconocimiento y caracterización de la población de estudiantes y docentes afrodescendientes en el contexto de la escuela y la formulación de estrategias orientadas a que la población estudiantil comprenda las razones históricas, sociales y normativas que justifican la adopción de tratos diferenciales en favor de la población afrocolombiana. Se sugiere que se procure la unificación de criterios con base en los principios de igualdad y no discriminación, participación, ejercicio pleno de la identidad étnica y la dimensión colectiva del grupo poblacional. A pesar del buen interés, el material realmente no ofrece a este tiempo herramientas que ayuden a los maestros a transformar su propia práctica y la cultura, que no solo segrega por el color de la piel, sino por cualquier otro identificador que destaque en medio de la uniformidad escolar. Si bien es innegable la relevancia de este tipo de materiales, conviene preguntarse por la pertinencia de sus contenidos, que se presentan bien como información aislada y poco significativa para los niños, niñas y jóvenes en un conjunto de fechas o nombres, o bien como el reconocimiento de elementos culturales que ahondan las diferencias en lugar de cerrarlas. Hacer referencia a determinados personajes destacados de la comunidad afrodescendiente a nivel internacional muchas veces no ayuda, teniendo en cuenta que en la población afrocolombiana realmente no hay un número representativo de miembros que tengan alcances significativos ni en la ciencia ni en el arte, dadas, digamos, las condiciones de su pobreza y de su aislamiento a nivel nacional. Y eso realmente lo que genera es frustración en los niños afrodescendientes. Para concluir, es destacable el hecho de que las instituciones colombianas continúen formulando iniciativas orientadas a dar continuidad a los procesos iniciados en la década de los 1990 para aumentar la participación de la población afrodescendiente en el contexto intercultural colombiano. Sin embargo, 30 años después, estos procesos ya deberían estar enfocados en otras etapas, como la eliminación de las barreras diferenciales entre la población colombiana desde la escuela. En el contexto escolar es evidente que muchas veces, con el ánimo de incluir, a menudo se segrega más. Con el ánimo de exaltación de las diferencias, con frecuencia se reproducen y perpetúan los esquemas de la discriminación. Esta imagen en la cartilla, por ejemplo, es muy llamativa. Me parece un poco aterrador el hecho de que el chico afrodescendiente tenga esta imagen de los grilletes y de las limitaciones que realmente socialmente posee la comunidad afrodescendiente en Colombia. Los diseños que materializan las políticas públicas resultan indispensables, aunque no necesariamente alcanzan el propósito que persiguen. Tal es el caso de los materiales que las autoridades responsables ponen a disposición de sus docentes para que asuman procesos formativos en temas para los cuales no cuentan con formación ni suficiencia teórica. De hecho, muchas veces tengo la imagen de que lo que asume el gobierno es que los maestros deben formarse por su cuenta y que la cátedra debe desarrollarse más desde la reflexión en la escuela que el hecho de que haya una capacitación como tal en estudios afroculturales. Por otra parte, la gran diversidad pluriétnica y multicultural de la población colombiana representa un gran reto de nación, pues una cátedra resulta insuficiente para atender todas las comunidades que se enmarcan en lo que se conoce como etnoeducación, más aún teniendo en cuenta que las problemáticas colombianas hoy día no solamente incluyen a la población afrodescendiente, tenemos un porcentaje muy alto de población indígena y aún más alto un porcentaje de población venezolana que obviamente no está entrando en cuestión étnica aquí, pero sí en una población adicional a la población colombiana. Resulta urgente considerar la naturaleza cambiante de la composición poblacional, no solo por los procesos migratorios internos y externos de los que les estaba hablando, sino también por el impacto que tienen las nuevas tecnologías sobre la formación de relación y de construcción desde la diferencia, desde la identidad, desde la diferencia. Con todos sus fallos, la Cátedra de Estudios Afrocolombianos es un esfuerzo significativo por resignificar y redignificar a los pueblos afrocolombianos. Para que resulte eficiente, hacen falta estrategias dinámicas desde la escuela y otras instituciones de impacto social y cultural. Finalmente, en el país que se asoma hoy a la reflexión sobre la paz y un posible posconflicto, sigue siendo importante la promoción de la ciudadanía igualitaria, la convivencia respetuosa y los principios democráticos, que deben iniciar desde el ámbito escolar, porque en últimas es la escuela ese contexto en el que los educadores deseamos sembrar las bases de un futuro mejor para las nuevas generaciones. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Carolina. Our next presenter is Kuniske Hirano from the University of Michigan. The title of his presentation in Spanish is Vulnerabilidad e interseccionalidad, competencia lingüística y seguridad en una escuela coreana en Japón. In English is Vulnerability and Intersectionality, Linguistic Proficiency and Feeling Safe at a Korean International School in Japan.
How are you? Good too. My name is Kuniske Hirano, and before I start my presentation, I want to thank Tim and Darin for the pre-departure meeting and organizing this event. Honestly speaking, I'm not really sure how I can contribute to this conference, but when I think about what I can take out from my own research, which is about Korea and Japan, I mean, to speak to the people who don't have any interest or knowledge to those two countries, I thought about some like theoretical implications and pedagogical lessons which we might be able to think about based on these case studies. So I picked one example of the conflict which happened in the international school built by Korean residents in Japan to think about what it means to feel safe in multicultural, like multilingual places. So the concept of this conference is vulnerability. And I will be talking about interpersonal relationships and linguistic fluency and ethnic identity at a Korean International School in Osaka, Japan. Before I go into the individual story, I want to go over the brief history of the Korean and Japan relationships in terms of the colonial legacy. So how many of you know that Korea was formerly colonized by Japan? Yes? It's like it happened like early 20th centuries, and after 1945, Korea gained the independence. But there are a lot of people who stayed in Japan after the World War ended. And some of them built a Korean school to teach Korean language and identity, which they imagined that those students eventually go back to Korea, mainly North Korea. But as you can see in the graph, after especially 80s or 90s, those schools and the number of enrollment decreased significantly. There are a lot of reasons. The first, now they are the third or fourth generations, and they are more likely to stay in Japan because they don't speak Korean that much. And at some point in early 20s, the North Korean government admitted the fact that they were kidnapping Japanese citizens to educate North Korean people to kind of become a spy in Japan. But I don't go into the details. So the Korean schools in Japan are in transition. They are losing the students, they are losing revenues, and they are target of the hate crimes in Japan too. So the takeout point is there are a lot of Korean schools in Japan, and they teach Korean language as an instruction language, and they have a really strict monolingual policy at school. So if you speak Japanese, which is a student's native language, you will be punished severely. But so Korean schools in Japan are trying to figure out the new survival strategies to keep certain number of students and to legitimize themselves to be in Japan. So there is a new Korean international school built in 2006, and they have 3 languages, English, Japanese, and Korean, and they teach 3 languages equally. If you look at their curriculum designing, they spend the same amount of hours per week to teach 3 languages. And if you go into the school, there are a lot of signs or messages written in 3 languages, and you see the President of the United States in the center, and upper left is the leader of North Korea, and the upper right is the president of South Korea, and the lower left is Prime Minister Abe, and lower right is the Prime Minister, the President, I'll say, of the China. Even if it's international school built by Koreans, the dominant language is Japanese. I would say 90% of conversations will be conducted in Japanese, except international students from Korea. And still, they keep some Korean languages, such as a term teacher or excuse me or sister or brother. They use those terms in Korean. English is kind of has a specific position at school because linguistically, Korean and Japanese are kind of similar, and English and Japanese and Korean are very different. So even if they spend the same amount of hours per week to study English, their proficiency of the English is really poor. A lot of students are bilingual of Japanese and Korean, but for example, they cannot do the conversations or discussions in English, that kind of proficiency. But there are some group of the people who are really proficient in English, and those students are kind of going to hold the special positions at school that they are called, those in the highest level are in a different world. They divide the classes, depending on the one's proficiency. Okay. This is the background information, but I went to this school for 4 months to conduct my dissertation research. I'm doing anthropology, and this was kind of part of my dissertation project. Okay, so after talking for 60 minutes, I will introduce the case study, which I want you to think together. There are 4 characters in this scene. The first one is Kathy. Kathy is a 4th generation Korean, but her parents are Korean Japanese who were born in Japan, so they migrated to the US, but somehow the family decided to come back to Japan. But Kathy spent almost her entire life in the US, in California, so her Japanese proficiency is not that fluent. She can do daily conversations, but when writing and reading, she struggles a lot. the second person is Kana. She is a Japanese national student who has no interest to the history, but she chose to come to this school because she was interested in K-pop and idols. I will talk more about her. The third person is Shelly. Shelly is the homeroom teacher of the high school one. Kathy and Kana are the classmates. They are both in high school one. Shelly is their homeroom teacher from Singapore, and she is, of course, fluent in English and Chinese, but her Japanese and Korean proficiencies are kind of okay. So there are always like miscommunications in the class. And the last person, school principal, he is a third generation Korean who went to Korean school in Japan. So he is very proficient in Japanese and Korean, but he cannot speak English well. What happened in this space is, so high school one was a very problematic class. So whenever you want to teach those students, they were like always slacking around, doing Instagram stories during the class, and they upload, those like stories on, even during the class time. So Kathy one time couldn't bear up with it, and she said, "Shut up, bitch." And everybody could understand what was the meaning of it. And then as a result, Kathy was kind of ostracized from the class, and I saw her eating lunch for herself at the hallway, sometimes with her sister who is in high school 3. And Kathy is not really proficient, fluent in Japanese, so whenever she talks with her homeroom teacher, Shelly, they talk in English. And one day, Kana, the Japanese national, said, "英語で話してんのムカつくんだよ," which means, "You guys talking in English is frustrating, annoying, and I don't understand." Since then, Shelly says, "Oh, I feel insecure to speak English since that incident." I also had a chance to talk with Kathy's family. And when I was eating dinner with them, the mother said, "I worry if Kathy's personality will be distorted because of this hate and misunderstanding from other students." And they reported the issue to the school principal. And he said, this was what he said at the very end of the semester. "I believe that being nice, 優しくすること is important. For the sake of pedagogical benefits, moving forward, teachers, please talk to the students in their native language." So what do you think? In this situation, if you are the school principal, how did you want to, intervene or not to intervene? Who did you want to talk to about what? This is more like a conclusion, not like a conclusion, but more like other information. But spending 4 months there, I heard a lot of voices from students saying English is being too far, 遠すぎる, linguistically and culturally. First, they know that even if they spend a lot of hours to learn English, they are not capable to use it for their work or have a conversation. And also, culturally, they might be interested in Korean idols or Japanese pop stars, but not really to Western idols. Also, the school tries to take advantage of the learning from the history of colonization between Japan and Korea, but I did feel that maybe they cannot think about the situations which does not directly relate to what they are seeing or knowing as first-hand experiences. Also, I also saw a lot of pedagogical fluctuations. So they tried to build a new school based on the history of ethnic Koreans in Japan, but their identity as a school, their pedagogical policies, as you can see in this incident, does not seem to be very consistent or clear to me. And lastly, I would like to pose, do we observe any cross-cultural universal theme in this conflict? There are a lot of informations to back up this incident, maybe at this point you think Kathy is a victim, who fell into the ignorance or the bullying from the Japanese national who is Kana. But according to Shelley, Shelley is kind of ambivalent to this instance because she says Kathy always accuses this school being not really international. So Kathy was expecting to speak in English because it's international school, but she found that students just talk in Japanese and Korean. Of course, she cannot be part of the conversation. And Shelley says Kathy is not really serious to learn Japanese and Korean. And Kathy's mother is actually a troublemaker. She always comes to school, complain how her daughters are marginalized and bullied, and not really appreciating the American culture. The former school principal said this school really didn't want to be another version of English-centered, Eurocentric version of international school. So this is kind of very, in a way, chaotic and very complex situation. And depending on which side you want to take, there are so many ways to narrate or judge this story and who is good or who is bad. How would you like to, intervene the situation? Okay, so this is what I was thinking about to introduce. But before I finish the presentation, do you have any questions about the background information? Which part of, the school or culture or daily life at school do you want to know more?
So you said Shelley is the homeroom teacher
Yes.
who's Singaporean.
Mhm.
So why is she saying that she feels insecure to speak English? And does she speak any other language when she teaches?
The reason why Shelley feels insecure to speak in English with Kathy and her sister is other students are looking at her like this. She kind of feels the gaze from other Japanese and Korean speakers because Kana is really a academically weak student. So what she complained to Kathy and Shelley is, she said, "Oh, maybe you guys are speaking ill of me." So, did I answer your question? What was your second
No,
part?
but she's the teacher.
Yes,
so,
she's a teacher, yes.
Yeah, and she's supposed to teach in English. So,
Yes.
but she just kind of feels
Um,
bad about the student.
Maybe during that class, she feels more entitled to speak in English. I mean, I went to her class several times, but students kind of slack around a lot and keep talking in English, in Japanese, and Shelley tried really hard to make them speak in English. But during that class time, it's okay. But outside the class, when they have the morning, homeroom or before, at the end of the day homeroom, sometimes Shelley couldn't come up with the right word. And sometimes Kathy translate, and the students feel they're kind of English allies. So this kind of sense of insecurity happens mainly outside the classroom. Any questions or if you are in this situation, what do you want to say, or how do you want to intervene? Or do you find any universal topics or themes which could appeal to cross-culturally or universally? Because I'm talking about the case which happened in Japan, but I kind of thought about talking about this because we can talk about the colonial legacy, language ideology, or linguistic fluency, and what it means to be on the dominant side and the vulnerable side. We don't need to come to the conclusion. I don't need to come to a conclusion at this point because at the end of this conference, we will be talking about the toolkit to be used in the class. So I just kind of wanting to kind of brainstorm or get some input from the audience.
Thank you. I was thinking about, as you were speaking,
Yes.
the idea of language as a marker for cultural identity
Mhm.
and how that relates to acceptance or exclusion of certain
change the perspective to look at, change the scale to look at this school, they are like, kind of like migrants in Japan who came to Japan long ago. So once you get out of this school, the dominant culture will be like Japanese one. So like everybody in this school could feel insecure, once you go out of this space. But in a way, the sad thing is that, this space could be working as a safe space for like Korean Japanese, who are kind of fluent in Korean and Japanese, but they are not really kind of, producing the ground rule to make everybody feel safe. And they're kind of, reproducing the structure of the violence, to me. I'm not really accusing this school itself because they're like nice enough to have me. I mean, for the teachers, maybe having anthropologists would be a very risky thing. And they're like doing their best to make this space a good one. But, as a researcher, sometimes I have to look at the things kind of critically. But yeah, in this space, Korean is like culturally and linguistically very dominant, but it doesn't, happen once you go out.
I think this is extremely interesting, and I think one of the sort of key themes that I think is applicable in multiple spaces is thinking about language ideologies and educational policy, in particularly multicultural context. It's interesting to, I can imagine this happening in other spaces with other languages and other people, and I think it's sort of the idea of multicultural spaces as being common, right? We think of them as being, this is a new thing, they're common. And sort of ideologies about language have an implication for educational practice. So I think it's super interesting.
I think just for the sake of time, we can take any other questions after the end of the panel. So. So our fourth presenter of the panel is Jennifer Rollison, also from the University of Michigan. The title of her talk in Spanish is El legado secreto de la guerra, desafíos de integración, aceptación y pertenencia para inmigrantes sudeste asiático americanos de primera y segunda generación. In English, the secret legacy of war, integration, acceptance, and belonging challenges for first and second generation Southeast Asian American immigrants.
Okay, so this talk for today is part of, it's a small part of my bigger research project, which is examining the half Thai, half American children who are legacy of the Vietnam War, both here in the United States and ones that had to remain in Thailand. One of the first things I thought when I was getting the presentation together was that I needed statistics and data and timelines and to spell out this big history. But those are things I don't think are as important in retrospect to what the point of my talk today is about. So when we think about the Vietnam War, a lot of people have different phrases in their minds about what happened. A lot of people, everybody knows it's about communism. They know terms like Tet Offensive and the Gulf of Tonkin and Viet Cong, Agent Orange. But those things are the history that kind of, it's sort of nameless and faceless. So what I want to talk about are the stories of the people who were affected after the war in Southeast Asia, which includes refugees from Laos and Vietnam, people who just chose to immigrate in the aftermath of war, as well as war brides who ended up coming to the United States. One of the things I thought of was Forrest Gump as I was getting this together. everybody knows that Forrest Gump goes to Vietnam, and Bubba's with him, and there he meets Lieutenant Dan. And later in the story, Lieutenant Dan comes back pretty broken from the war, but then you see this rejuvenation at Forrest's wedding where he shows up, he's got new legs, and he's got an Asian wife or fiance with him at the time. And I was thinking, well, how does that fit into a story about veterans and Asians in America after the war? So anyway, let me get on to my point here. Okay, so sorry for this kind of wall of text quote, but in thinking about Forrest Gump and thinking about these faceless, nameless people that are it's an ongoing legacy of the war, what is the story behind these people? And where did they come from? Where did they go after the war? After we know all of the historical data and statistics and timeline of the war. So I want to know about the stories, about these children who came here, about the women and men who came here after the Vietnam War. So some of those people, as I mentioned already, the Hmong refugees who came from Laos, we have the Vietnamese boat people, and we have Operation Baby Lift, all of these things attributed to Asian Americans in the United States. But what is the story after they got here? Were they accepted into American communities, especially if they didn't end up in their own cultural ethnic communities? You know, we know there's Chinatown, we know there's Thai Town in Los Angeles, all of these different kind of enclaves of the ethnicities, but some people, myself included, ended up without any sort of cultural or ethnic community and are sort of left afloat and at sea in all white communities. Looks like one of my photos is missing, unfortunately. But so this was my parents, a photo taken in Thailand while my dad was stationed there during the Vietnam War in Karat. So my mother is from northeastern Thailand, known as Karat, and he met her, she got pregnant, he married her there in Thailand, and he actually came back to the United States during the summer and then sent for her in November, which is a month before I was born. This is not the story that happened for probably a significant number of GIs. A lot of GIs came home and left behind their girlfriends, children, wives, whatever. This photo was supposed to be my baby picture, and I don't know what happened to it, but in my baby picture, I look a lot more Asian as a child. I look 100% Asian, which I don't think I do as much as an adult. I look like I'm something, but I don't necessarily look Asian, I don't think identifiably. But when I was a child in elementary school, and that photo's missing also. Well, anyway, so this was a class picture of me with my entire classroom growing up all through elementary school. This quote resonated with me as I'm Asian American, and I was the only Chinese girl growing up in a white school in San Diego. So I understood what it was like to be different, to always want to fit in and never feel like you could. So I was a single Asian girl in an all-white school growing up in the years following Vietnam. There was one black family in our school, and we know that blacks historically have been discriminated against in the United States. However, Rich Carter was American, at least, according to the rest of the students. I was something that was other. So I was called chink, I was called gook. People would walk around with their eyes slanted up and calling names. And I never felt like I belonged with that group of students in this all-white Southwestern Pennsylvania classroom. So, let's see. I don't know what happened to, do you have these photos?
Looking at it here, and it doesn't have them on.
They're,
Yeah, I don't know.
how odd. I know they're, because I looked at my photos seem like they're all missing. But, so anyway, so what this was here was a tweet, actually, that's on the other side of the screen, which said, it's from an Asian American, and it said, white people say, you're Asian. And Asian people look at you and they say, you're white. So where do we fit in this country? And this is not just for Asian Americans. This is for any sort of mixed race or mixed ethnicity. So, and not only just a race issue, but these are socioeconomic issues that can happen, whether you're rich or poor, whether how you identify, if you're LGBTQ or not, depending on these little pockets of how American your community is that you grew up in. If there's not any exposure to other cultures, then it's very difficult to grow up here in the United States. So what I wanted to talk about, given that this is about education, is how do we encourage inclusion and promote diversity in the classrooms, because that was something that I never had growing up. I don't know that my fellow classmates knew that I was Thai. In their minds, I might as well have been Vietnamese and the enemy, because during that time, and maybe even still now, usually Americans can't tell the difference between Asians. You can say, oh, that person's Asian, but so what can we do in order to promote diversity in the classrooms to make these students who are coming here out of trauma, perhaps, if they're refugees, or they've survived whether natural disasters which have happened here, or however it may go, that they end up in the United States. One of the things that educators can do is increase your cultural competence. Sorry. So the University of Michigan, for example, has the MENA C teacher program for religious and cultural diversity. And what that is it's the Middle Eastern and North African studies and Southeast Asian studies programs through Title VI funding are available for public educators in the greater Ann Arbor, Detroit area to attend. In each monthly meeting, they talk about some sort of ethnic or cultural importance to these communities, the students that are in those communities that might be in their classroom, so they can teach more broadly to those students, as well as to teach American students what is the story behind the face that sits in your classroom. This isn't just somebody who is from a different place or community. They're just like us, and they have a story. And what is that story? Another way that we can include diversity is to build cultural heritage days into curriculums. Looking for important, like celebrating Chinese New Year, for example, or teaching about Chinese New Year, which doesn't happen on the 1st of January the way it does for the rest of the world usually, and going beyond that for Thailand. Thai New Year isn't until April, although they also follow the 1st of January as far as the global New Year. So what are ways that we can build cultural heritage in, and that is for the teachers, the educators to actually learn. What is it that I can learn about these students who are in my classroom, and how can I make the classroom overall more inclusive for those students? What do they celebrate and what do they respect, which isn't part of our normal American culture every day? And then another thing is to just keep your classroom a respectful and safe space for these vulnerable community members. I can't remember a single time in my elementary school that my teacher stood up for me against the other students in my classroom. So when I was being teased or picked on and would walk home crying from school every day because it was pretty bad for me this is in the late 1970s, just after Vietnam happened though. I don't remember my teacher, my educator being a safe person that I could go to that would be protective of me. And that's so important for educators also to realize that children need to have these safe and affinity spaces. And those are the ways to be able to promote that is support affinity spaces. Like if you have LGBTQ students in your classroom, help them organize pride events. If you have multiple ethnicities in your classroom, make a Thai club or make a Puerto Rican club. Do whatever you can to promote their culture and ethnicity and also to protect them from hurtful language and disrespect. And then finally, so my conclusion is that students from these vulnerable communities are more than just statistics. They have a story. And we could say, you know, during the years following Vietnam, Asian American immigration grew from, I think it was around 250,000 to 2.5 million within a certain span of time by 1980. So we know that statistic, but we also need to know what's the story behind each and every one of these students in our classrooms, in our community, so that they can feel important and they can feel as though they belong here, which is their home now. And I think that's about it. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry my PowerPoint failed.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have a couple of minutes literally for maybe some questions or comments to any of the presenters in any order. So anybody, preguntas, comentarios, a cualquiera de los ponentes.
And there'll be time for more conversation later if you think of a question later.
I did have lo que sí quería comentarte, Camila, que creo que fue importante tu trabajo, no solamente pensar en la fotografía, sino el acto de tomar la fotografía y cómo pensar no solamente con nuestros estudiantes, tanto a nivel universitario como a nivel escolar, no solamente el objeto mismo, que es la conclusión casi, que es la fotografía, sino el acto de literalmente tomar la cámara, enfocar el lente, la persona que está al frente, y esa idea del acto mismo de tomar la foto y cómo quizás también cuando usamos ese tipo de material con nuestros estudiantes, pensar en cómo hacerles pensar en preguntas precisamente de en qué contexto se cogió la foto, quién la cogió, quién se dejó tomar y quién no se dejó tomar la foto y qué implica eso, que creo que es una discusión importante de lo que hiciste. Y no sé si tenías algún comentario extra rápido sobre eso en particular.
Yo creo que exacto lo que había comentado en la presentación, abrir el espacio para explorar las distintas herramientas, preguntas, eso de instigar, que se puede hacer distinto, se puede hacer de distintas maneras y o sea, hay espacio para eso, básicamente.
Yo tengo una preguntita.
Sí.
¿Qué tipo de cámara usaste cuando tomaste la
No, fue una cámara semiprofesional, como una Nikon. Eh, exacto. Como la, por eso, solo para hablar brevemente, yo no soy fotógrafo. Mi hermana sí es fotógrafa, pero ella estaba en Brasil. Yo precisamente compré la cámara acá en Puerto Rico. Pregunté para un amigo de aquí, fotógrafo, cuál sería la mejor opción para no, ¿verdad? Y cuando estaba cogiendo las clases como tal de antropología visual y fotoetnografía en la universidad, se trabajó más cuestiones más teóricas, conceptuales, etcétera, pero como manejo de cámara no hubo mucho eso. Yo básicamente tuve unas clases por Skype con mi hermana y literalmente empecé a explorar la cámara. Cogí en el mismo centro un taller de fotografía, que también me ayudó un poco. Y lo demás fue bien instintivo y fue tratando, cometiendo muchos errores y poco a poco me fui acostumbrando con la cámara. Porque tampoco, o sea, no, fue un proceso.
Yo tengo una pregunta para la profesora Tobar. Quiero felicitarla por su presentación y decirle que me interesa mucho porque estamos en el Departamento de Educación trabajando con la incorporación de la afrodescendencia de manera transversal también en todos los currículos del departamento, no solamente en el de estudios sociales, sino que también a través de las lecturas suplementarias que se utilizan en inglés, en español, que esté en todas partes. Me gustaría invitarla para que, ¿verdad? Si, como ella está aquí en Puerto Rico, si quiere unirse a un comité que estamos trabajando también con miembros de aquí de UPR del Congreso de la Afrodescendencia. No sé si ha tenido contacto con alguno de ellos.
Pues no he tenido el gusto, pero pues obviamente agradezco la invitación porque realmente pues es mi tema de estudio y me interesa bastante.
Aquí en la UPR está la doctora Mariela Torres, que ella me parece que es del área de literatura, que ella es especialista ella es del área de arte, y ella es especialista en todo el tema de afrodescendencia, y hay un grupo bien nutrido porque en Puerto Rico se celebra el Congreso de Afrodescendencia todos los años. Entonces, me gustaría que usted, ¿verdad?, nos pudiera compartir esas estrategias para incorporar en las políticas públicas el tema de la afrodescendencia, porque realmente es un poco, déjame decirle que es un poco cuesta arriba. Y el poder lograr, y principalmente en Puerto Rico, que todo lo vemos desde el ámbito ideológico, ¿verdad? Y cómo poder canalizar un tema que nos atañe a todos de lo que somos, y que en momentos donde nuestros estudiantes también necesitan referentes, verse al espejo y sentirse, ¿verdad?, que yo tengo a alguien quien puede ser mi modelo, mi ejemplo, y distanciarlo del tema esclavista, ¿verdad? Que eso es lo más. Así que le quiero extender esta invitación para que participe con nosotros y nos pueda dar, ¿verdad?, la perspectiva de Puerto Rico.
Muchísimas gracias, claro que sí, estoy muy interesada en participar.
Another question or comment? So maybe thank all of the participants. We're gonna try to quickly move in a couple of minutes to the next panel. So we have one more panel, then we have lunch for everybody, so stay with us. And then after lunch, we have one of our seminars with Darren. So let's just quickly, in the next couple of minutes, like move this panel for the next one, and we can start. Presentación fue maravillosa y bella, en serio.
Gracias.
Acá entre tú y yo.